Essentially, everybody in the United States has already been impacted by climate change because of the giant explosion in forest fire activity across the West. And because climate change and forest fires affect precipitation and runoff, then we are all affected through water resources. I hope that we can recognize that a future climate that's very different from a climate in the past is one that we are unprepared for, and the sooner we can curb greenhouse gas emissions, the better.
That is an excerpt from an interview with 2023 MacArthur Fellow Park Williams, who is a hydroclimatologist uncovering new insights into how climate change influences drought, wildfires, and tree mortality. Williams uses statistical analysis of climate data, reconstructions of past ecosystem behavior, and detailed understanding of plant ecology to unravel the feedback between atmospheric and land-based water cycles. In this episode, we go in depth with Park to learn more about him, his work, and his exceptional creativity. Let's hear more from his interview.
When the Earth's climate changes, then the distribution of water across the continents changes profoundly. If you look at a map of the globe, you can very clearly see that the distribution of life across the continents is very much dictated by the distribution of water across the continents. So when the Earth's climate changes, life ultimately changes as well. When we put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the very first thing that happens is the atmosphere warms. As the atmosphere's temperature warms, then the atmosphere's vapor pressure deficit increases. The vapor pressure deficit is essentially the thirst of the atmosphere. When it goes up, then the atmosphere can pull water out of soils and ecosystems more rapidly. This means that a warmer world may end up being a wetter world overall, because a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor and therefore drive stronger precipitation events. But it also means that when it's not raining, water is able to evaporate faster. And over continents where you don't have unlimited supplies of water the way we do over the ocean, that means that drought events will tend to become more severe. When you dry the atmosphere and you dry the soils and ecosystems, then those ecosystems become more flammable. And larger wildfires is currently a trend that we're seeing across the West that is transforming the landscape. We have seen an incredibly strong relationship between each year's vapor pressure deficit and the area that burns in the Western United States, especially in forested areas where there's plenty of fuel to burn. The really interesting and pretty scary thing about this relationship is that it's not a linear one, it's an exponential one. What that means is that each little bit of warming and each little bit of an increase in the vapor pressure deficit causes more additional forest fire than the previous bit does. And exponential processes can start off looking pretty benign and explode into something very concerning very quickly. In the Western United States, the annual forest area burned has increased by over 1,300% in just the last 4 decades. About 10 years ago or so, I did a study where I used tree ring records across the southwestern United States. Tree ring records are really indicators of forest growth. A wide annual growth ring indicates good growth. A skinny annual growth ring indicates bad growth. And some of these records go back into the 800s AD or before. Many of them come up close to present, or at least into the 2000s. During the 1900s, we also have really good observational climate records. And so we're able to compare those tree ring records to climate records. And what we saw was that when it's hot and the vapor pressure deficit is high, then trees don't grow nearly as well. There was such a strong relationship between the vapor pressure deficit and tree growth in combination with precipitation that we were then able to forecast into the future how forests are going to respond. And what we found was that by the 2050s or so, we are going to have forests in the southwestern United States experiencing drought stress that is unprecedented relative to the level of drought stress that the tree ring records indicate they have experienced any time in the last 1,000 years or so. As the Earth's climate is changing, we all have curiosity and concern about what is going to happen in the future. But we only have one Earth and one chance to observe what's going to happen, and that incentivizes us to build computer models that allow us to experiment to see if we increase CO2 by X amount, what's going to happen. Or if we were to perform prescribed burns across forests of the Western United States, then what is going to happen? But computer models have their own uncertainties. They're tools that we have created based on an understanding of the Earth system that is not perfect. And therefore it is critical that we also use observations. Our observations of the Earth allow us to tell whether or not our simulations of the Earth are in line with reality or not. In the Western United States, we have been making observations of essentially everything in the environment, better in my opinion than pretty much anywhere on the planet. And that makes it a really great place to study not only how is climate change affecting the Western United States, but how is climate change affecting the entire planet. Even if people aren't living in the middle of ecosystems that are being profoundly impacted by climate change at this time, essentially everybody in the United States has already been impacted by the warming trend that's occurred across the West because of the giant explosion in forest fire activity that's occurred. The reason why people are being affected is through smoke. Smoke is the ultimate connector between climate change and the population around the globe. Also, people generally don't use water that falls as rain right where they live, but instead they're using water that once upon a time fell in the mountains and was stored in a lake reservoir or in an underground reservoir. Because climate change and forest fires affect precipitation and runoff in our mountains, then we are all affected by climate change and forest fires through water resources. A lot of my research is motivated by the desire to help humanity through the next several decades. At the global level, I hope that we can recognize that a future climate that's very different from a climate in the past is one that we are unprepared for, and the sooner we can curb greenhouse gas emissions, the better. But a local scale, where local decisions don't necessarily have a large influence on the global CO2 emissions, there are management things that can be done. For example, we can manage forests in a way to try and be more sustainable or guide forests through a more flammable future. We can manage water resources more sustainably and be better prepared for more intense droughts, but also potentially more intense storms when they do occur. Management decisions and changing management policy requires a high confidence in projections into the future. So a lot of my work aims to try and understand what these changes are going to look like before they actually occur so we can be best prepared.
Park Williams is a professor of geography at the University of California, Los Angeles. Within the department, he leads the Hydroclimate, Fire, Vegetation, and Society Research Group, also known as the High Fives. His work has been published in a variety of scientific journals. The MacArthur Fellows program identifies and supports extraordinarily creative individuals with a track record of excellence who demonstrate the ability to impact society in significant and beneficial ways through their pioneering work. To learn more, visit us at macfound.org.